You didn't buy a yacht. You didn't move into a penthouse. You didn't lease a Ferrari. You didn't do any of the things people point to when they talk about spending too much money. And yet somehow, every time you get a raise, every time your income goes up, you end up with roughly the same amount left over at the end of the month, maybe less. You're not reckless. You're not irresponsible. But the money keeps disappearing and you can't quite figure out where it's going. There's no single villain in this story. No impulse purchase you can point to and say, that's the problem. It's quieter than that, more patient. It creeps in through the small things, the reasonable things, the things that just feel like a normal adjustment to your circumstances. That's lifestyle inflation. And the reason most people never catch it is because, by design, it never looks like a problem. Let's go back to the moment you got your first real paycheck. Not the big career money. The first job. Maybe it was $14 an hour, maybe it was $32,000 a year. The number doesn't matter. What matters is what that money meant to you at the time. You had a budget whether you called it that or not. You knew what you could afford for rent. You cooked most nights. You picked the mid-tier option on the menu. Not the bottom, but definitely not the top. You were careful in a way that felt natural because the math demanded it. Then things got better. Gradually, the way things usually do. Maybe a promotion, maybe a new job, maybe a side income that started turning real. And with every step up, you made small adjustments, nothing dramatic. You moved somewhere a little nicer because you'd earned it. You stopped tracking every grocery run because, honestly, what's the point of working harder if you can't stop stressing about groceries? You upgraded your phone on the normal cycle instead of waiting an extra year. You started taking cabs when it was raining instead of standing in the cold. None of these decisions were wrong. That's what makes this so hard to see. Here's the mechanic that no one explains clearly enough. When your income rises, your spending doesn't stay flat. It rises too, but it rises in a way that feels completely justified at every individual step. That's the trap. Lifestyle inflation isn't about bad decisions. It's about the accumulated weight of reasonable ones. In behavioral economics, this is partly explained by something called hedonic adaptation. It's the brain's tendency to normalize new conditions extremely quickly. You get the bigger apartment and within about 3 months, it's just your apartment. It no longer feels like an upgrade, it feels like the baseline. And from that new baseline, the old conditions start to feel insufficient. Not luxurious by comparison. Insufficient. The apartment you were perfectly happy in a year ago now looks, in your memory, slightly worse than it actually was. This isn't weakness, it's biology. The same mechanism that lets you stop noticing the hum of your refrigerator is the one that quietly redraws your financial floor every time your life improves. Now here's where the math gets uncomfortable. Say you're earning $60,000 a year. You're saving about $400 a month. Not bad. Not great. You get a raise to $75,000. That's $1,250 more per month before tax. Call it roughly $900 after. The logical expectation is that your savings climb significantly. Maybe you add $600 or $700 a month to what you were already setting aside. But studies on household spending patterns consistently show that for every dollar of increased income, the average person saves somewhere between 10 and 20 cents of it. The rest gets absorbed, not in one place, across everything. The food budget loosens, the streaming subscriptions multiply, the gym gets upgraded, the vacations get slightly more elaborate, the car payment nudges up at the next lease. None of these individually registers as a meaningful choice. Together, they consumed 80 to 90% of a raise you worked a full year to earn. That's not a spending problem in the conventional sense. That's a structural problem. A design flaw in how humans respond to abundance. Let's talk about the subscription economy for a second, because it is one of the cleanest examples of how lifestyle inflation hides. In 2015, the average American household subscribed to roughly 2 streaming services. By 2023, that number was sitting closer to 4 or 5, at an average combined cost somewhere around $60 to $80 a month depending on tier. That's before you count the music subscription, the news site, the cloud storage, the productivity app, the fitness platform, and whatever the algorithm convinced you to try during a free trial that you never quite got around to canceling. Every single one of these was, at the moment you signed up, a small and reasonable decision. $12.99 a month, less than a coffee a day. the classic framing. But these things don't cancel themselves. They layer. And because they're automatic, because the charge just appears and disappears from your account with no friction, they become invisible. Financially invisible. You'd be surprised how many people, when asked to estimate their monthly subscriptions, come in 30 to 40% below the actual figure. The subscription model was designed around this exact psychology. Low per unit cost, automatic renewal, enough value to keep you from canceling, but not so much that you actively think about it. The product isn't what you're watching or listening to. The product is your inertia, and this is just one category. Now zoom out a level, because the version of this that really costs you isn't the subscriptions, it's housing and cars. Housing first. There's a common rule of thumb that says you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your gross income on housing. It's a reasonable benchmark. But over the last decade, as incomes rose, the ceiling on what people considered acceptable housing costs rose with them. In 2010, the median first-time homebuyer was purchasing something modest in a location that wasn't their ideal, because that's what was available. By the early 2020s, with low interest rates and rising incomes, people had recalibrated what starter home meant. Square footage expectations went up. Location expectations went up. The psychology of what felt sufficient had shifted. Then interest rates doubled, and the math became brutal. But the expectations didn't come back down. Expectations almost never do. Cars work the same way, with an added twist. The average monthly car payment in the United States crossed $700 in 2023 for a new vehicle. $700 a month. That's more than rent in some parts of the world. And the reason people sign those contracts isn't recklessness. It's that they're comparing the new payment to their current income, not to what they were paying 5 years ago. The car payment feels manageable today because income today is higher. What they're not calculating is everything else that also expanded alongside that income. The payment is manageable, barely. And that's the zone where lifestyle inflation lives. Barely manageable, just under the pressure threshold where you'd actually change something. There's a version of this story that used to have a clear villain. The Joneses. You've heard the phrase? Keeping up with the Joneses. It implied external pressure, social competition, visible wealth signals. A neighbor gets a new car, you feel the pull to get one too. It was at least legible. You could identify the source of the pressure and, theoretically, resist it. Social media replaced the Joneses with something far more potent. The comparison class is no longer your neighborhood. It's a curated global feed of peak moments, filtered through algorithms designed to maximize engagement, which in financial terms means maximizing aspiration. You're not comparing yourself to the people around you anymore. You're comparing yourself to the most successful-looking moments of thousands of people, simultaneously all day. The result is a perpetually elevated sense of what normal looks like. The vacation that used to feel like a treat now looks modest next to what fills your feed. The kitchen renovation that felt finished now has an obvious missing element. The reference class keeps expanding, and with it, the floor of what feels like enough. Nobody's forcing you to feel this way. It's just the water you're swimming in. And water, as they say, doesn't feel wet when you've never been dry. Here's what makes this genuinely hard to solve, and why the standard advice falls short. Most personal finance content treats this as a discipline problem. Just spend less. Track your budget. Make a plan. And yes, those things help. But they're addressing the symptom, not the architecture. The deeper issue is that the entire economic environment you live in is engineered to expand your spending in proportion to your income. Higher income means better credit. Better credit means access to larger loans. Larger loans mean bigger houses and nicer cars, which reset your expectations upward, which makes the old baseline feel impossible to return to. It's not a moral failing. It's a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The people who successfully interrupt this cycle don't do it through willpower alone. They do it by deciding, at a specific moment in time, what their lifestyle is actually worth defending, and then treating any income above that as a separate category with a separate set of rules. They essentially draw a line and say, "This is the life I'm living," and raises don't move the line. What changes is how much of the surplus I keep. That sounds simple. It is almost never easy, because every raise comes wrapped in a narrative. You earned this. You worked for it. You deserve the upgrade. And that narrative isn't wrong. The problem is that it has no natural stopping point. You will always have earned it. The upgrade will always be available. The bar will always move up just a little more. The most financially stable people aren't the ones with the highest incomes. They're the ones with the widest gap between what they earn and what they've decided they need. That gap, not income, not net worth, not the number on the portfolio, that gap is the actual measure of financial freedom. And lifestyle inflation is the one force most consistently dedicated to closing it. What's strange is that we have more tools than ever to track this. More apps, more data, more visibility into where every dollar goes. And yet the gap keeps closing for most people because the tools only help if you're willing to see what the data is showing you. Most of us aren't. Not really. It's more comfortable to attribute the shortfall to external forces, inflation, the economy, the cost of living, than to look at the slow, quiet, reasonable choices that accumulated into a lifestyle you can just barely afford. The cost of living did go up. That part's real. But it didn't go up by as much as most people's spending did. So here's the question worth sitting with. If you woke up tomorrow with your income cut by 20%, not devastatingly, not catastrophically, just a meaningful step down, how much of your current life would actually have to change? How much of what you spend on is genuinely irreplaceable and how much of it is just the floor you've drifted to without noticing? You don't have to answer that out loud. But the fact that it takes more than a second to answer is, in itself, a kind of answer.